I woke up with bruises in places I couldn't reach, and the person I loved most kept taking notes about them. I thought I was losing my mind until I found the syringes. Now I can't unsee what he's been doing to me.
Welcome to Reddit Toxic Family Telltales channel. New episode every day.
I used to think bruises were just random, bumping into furniture, clumsy girl stuff. So when I woke up one morning with little blue-purple marks across my hips, I laughed it off to my boyfriend, Nathan. Guess I'm just fragile, I joked. But a week later, when the bruises multiplied, perfectly aligned down my arms, thighs, even along my ribs, the joke stopped being funny. Nathan would trace them with his fingertips, eyes narrowed, whispering things like, "They're perfectly symmetrical," before snapping photos and jotting notes in a little book. Gave me a weird, crawling feeling. "That's kind of strange, isn't it?" I asked once, but he barely looked up. By the third week, I couldn't hide them under clothes anymore. My body felt like lead. I literally nodded off in the middle of a client presentation, something I'd never done before. Then something even scarier happened. My period just stopped. Mid-cycle. Gone. When I told Nathan, his face didn't show concern, it lit up. "What day exactly?" he asked, pen poised. My stomach flipped. The bruises were showing up in spots I physically couldn't reach. Out of desperation, I set up a camera to film myself sleeping, but every file ended up corrupted. Nathan shrugged and blamed the Wi-Fi, though Netflix streamed just fine. I was on the edge of making a doctor's appointment when a DM popped up on Instagram. It was Dana, Nathan's ex. "Check your hormone levels immediately. Please." At first, I almost ignored it, but then she sent a photo of her own bruises, same eerie pattern as mine. We met at a Starbucks. When she walked in, my heart stuttered. She was only 25, but she looked decades older. She didn't waste time. "Those marks? Injection sites. Nathan is doing something to you." My hand shook so hard I nearly spilled my drink. "That's insane," I whispered. Dana showed me her medical records, hormone levels of a menopausal woman. He learned it from his mother. She runs a fertility clinic on Lexington. He uses numbing cream so you don't feel the needles. I left Starbucks in a fog and drove straight to the nearest ER, Dana's records still on my phone. I demanded a hormone panel. The doctor's brow furrowed. "Are you taking Lupron for endometriosis by any chance?" When I asked what Lupron even was, her face went pale. "It shuts down your ovaries. We use it for endometriosis or IVF prep, but at high doses it can cause permanent damage." That night, I forced myself to stay awake, even as exhaustion clawed at me. Around 3 a.m., I felt something cold on my hip, a numbing cream, followed by spreading numbness. Through half-closed eyes, I saw Nathan with a syringe, lining up the injection like a practice routine. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he'd hear it, but I stayed still. The next morning, after he left for work, I tore the apartment apart. Nothing. Then I remembered the guitar case he never touched. Inside, my world shattered. Vials of Lupron with prescription labels bearing my name. Syringes. Lidocaine cream. His notebook. Pages of my hormone levels predicted weeks in advance, matching my blood work exactly. I sat there for hours, shaking. When Nathan came home, I didn't even wait. I hurled the notebook at his chest. "What is this?" He didn't flinch. His voice was calm, almost proud. "You said you wanted to make a difference. What are you talking about?" I screamed. "Your eggs are helping infertile couples. 3 babies already on the way." The room spun. "My eggs." He opened his laptop. There I was in clinic footage, apparently awake, signing consent forms I didn't remember. "The sedative causes amnesia but keeps you cooperative," he said. "Mom's been perfecting it for years." I felt like my knees would give out. He laughed softly. "Remember when you thought you had appendicitis and had surgery at that free clinic? That was egg retrieval. We managed to collect 67 eggs. Couples paid $100,000 each, but baby, you have premium genetics. SAT scores, IQ tests, you're a gold mine." I locked myself in the bathroom, gagging as my phone buzzed with texts from Dana, names of 5 other women. All infertile by 25. All with the same story. When I emerged, Nathan was leaning in the doorway, smirking. I lunged, but my body was too weak. Caught my wrists. "The damage is irreversible, if you're wondering. Your ovaries are dead tissue now. But I did it for you. And I'd still marry you." I stared up at him, forcing my face into a soft, doe-eyed smile. "I'd still marry you too," I whispered. And that idiot believed me. When he kissed me, I almost laughed. 'Cause by then, I had his key. I knew his schedule. He'd already taught me how to handle syringes. And soon, he'd wake up to the same nightmare he gave 15 women. Only his wouldn't end. My phone alarm shrieked at 4:30 a.m., and I slapped it silent before Nathan could stir. My bag was already zipped, vials, his notebook, every photo I'd taken of that guitar case hidden inside. He shifted in his sleep, one heavy arm sliding across my stomach. My skin crawled. I froze, counting his breaths until they slowed into that deep rhythm again. Only then did I slide out from under him, heart hammering. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped my keys. In the car, I texted him a lie about an emergency client meeting, knowing he wouldn't see it for hours. The storage facility on Route 9 was blessedly open 24/7. I'd rented a unit under my old roommate Sarah's name weeks ago, back when my paranoia first started. Inside, I locked everything into a fireproof box, then spent an hour uploading photos to 3 different cloud accounts Nathan had no clue about: my main Gmail, a dusty old Yahoo from college, and a brand new Proton Mail I'd set up at the library. Back at the apartment that afternoon, Nathan was at his usual Saturday gym class. I took out the drill I'd bought at Home Depot and screwed a deadbolt onto my bedroom door. The smart home gadgets he'd installed were trickier. Alexa, the Nest cams, even the thermostat, I disconnected them one by one. When he got home and asked about the lock, I kept my voice soft, said I'd been having nightmares and just needed to feel safe. He actually smiled, said he understood. Dana called while he was in the shower. I whispered about the guitar case and she gave me 5 more numbers, other women. She warned me Nathan had gotten worse with each one, more controlling, and that 2 had already tried going to the police but hit brick walls. The next few days blurred together. Monday morning, I hit 3 medical offices back to back, politely requesting complete copies of my records. The second place, the receptionist frowned. "Nobody ever asks for raw lab data and timestamps," she said. I forced a smile. My new insurance is strict. That afternoon, I parked outside a Dunkin' Donuts, opened my laptop, and hit record. For 40 minutes straight, I poured out everything, from the first bruises to the moment I found the guitar case. My voice cracked when I described the fake surgery, cracked again when I talked about the 67 eggs. But I kept going. I needed it all down while it was still fresh. Tuesday morning, my boss Karen pulled me into her office. She had a folder with my name on it: missed deadlines, the client presentation disaster. A performance improvement plan, 30 days to turn things around. I wanted to scream that I was being drugged and harvested like a lab rat, but instead I smiled, nodded, promised to do better. My nails dug half-moons into my palms to keep from shaking. That afternoon, during lunch, I found a tiny studio apartment. Smelled faintly of mildew, but the landlord took cash, didn't ask questions. Month-to-month lease, starting immediately. I handed him $1,220 in 20s I'd been squirreling away from random ATM withdrawals. Thursday, I walked into a police station clutching a folder of evidence. The officer at the front desk barely skimmed my papers before saying it sounded domestic, maybe family court, maybe a restraining order. I stared at him for a full minute, then walked out without a word. That's when I called the victim's legal clinic Dana had told me about. They connected me with Nora Simpson the next day. Her office walls were covered in newspaper clippings from cases she'd won: medical assault, patient abuse, predators hiding behind credentials. She listened to my story without interrupting once, scribbling on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she laid out our options: a civil lawsuit for damages, criminal charges if we could hook the DA, and complaints to the medical board against Nathan's mother. The board was actually our best shot, she said. They moved faster and cared more about license violations than the courts did. She offered to take my case pro bono. "This is exactly why I became a lawyer," she said. Back at my apartment that night, I combed through old bank statements. My stomach dropped. Charges from Nathan's mom's clinic, thousands of dollars, dating back months. All timed with the appendix surgery. The signatures looked like mine, but I had zero memory of signing. My hand shook as I snapped photos of every single statement. The next morning, while Nathan was in the shower, I started packing a bag with just the basics, shoving clothes into my old gym bag as quietly as I could. My phone rang, Nathan calling from the bathroom, asking where his razor was. I hit record on my phone and told him it was in the cabinet. He started talking, casual as ever, about how grateful the couples were, how we were helping people who couldn't have kids naturally. He said it like we were dropping off a box of old clothes at Goodwill. I muted myself, ran to the kitchen sink, and dry heaved. I knew then, my escape plan couldn't wait much longer. 2 days later, I sat across from a judge with every shred of evidence spread out on her desk. Photos of the bruises, lab reports showing sky-high lupin levels, even printouts of Nathan's notes. She barely glanced at them. In a clipped tone, she said without specific threats of violence or overt physical assault, it was a criminal matter, not grounds for a protective order. Just like that. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Completely alone. 2 a.m. that night, my friend Sarah slipped into the apartment while Nathan snored on the couch, dead to the world from drinking. We didn't speak, we didn't dare. We moved like ghosts, taking only what I absolutely needed: my laptop, documents, a few clothes, leaving everything else to avoid raising suspicion. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart slam against my ribs. The next day, from the safety of my new apartment, I sent an email to Rex Guthrie, the journalist who'd blown open a massive medical fraud scandal last year. I attached a careful packet of evidence and a summary of what Nathan and his mother were doing. 3 hours later, he replied. He was interested but needed more proof, more victims willing to go on record before he could publish. That same week, I sat in an endocrinologist's office while she explained my test results. Her words felt like they were echoing down a tunnel. Damage consistent with long-term exposure to GnRH agonists, chemical castration, medically induced menopause at 25. She started me on hormone replacement therapy but warned I'd probably need it for life. That afternoon, Dana gave my number to Aurora Townsend. Aurora called me immediately, and within hours I was on a video chat with her and 3 other women Nathan had done this to. Different faces, same story. Bruises, exhaustion, fake surgeries at his mom's clinic. We agreed to work together, pool evidence, coordinate our response. The next morning, a message popped up on Signal from someone named Leah Rodriguez, a nurse at Nathan's mother's clinic. She said she had information about special protocols for certain patients. She was terrified but couldn't stay silent anymore after seeing what they'd done to us. She wanted to meet, but only in a crowded public place. 3 days later, HR called me into another meeting at work. They recited a list of missed deadlines, the presentation I'd fallen asleep during. My job was officially on the line. I nodded through the whole lecture, biting back the urge to scream that I'd been drugged and harvested like a lab animal for months. That evening, I met with Nora again. In her office, she laid out our entire strategy on a whiteboard, bullet points, arrows, timelines. She told me to focus on preserving evidence, building an airtight case, filing complaints through the right channels. Then she fixed me with a look and said, "Any vigilante move, any hint of revenge, it could destroy everything and land you in jail." She made me promise 3 times to let the legal system handle it. So over the next few days, I buried myself in organization. Folders labeled by date. Screenshots of every charge. More signatures that looked like mine but felt alien. A spreadsheet tracking every symptom, every bruise, every day I'd been too exhausted to function. Dana connected me with 2 more women who dated Nathan years ago, one infertile, the other aged so drastically she looked decades older. Same injection patterns. Same memory gaps. Same hollowed-out lives. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow even though Nathan didn't know where I was. I added 3 locks to my door and installed a security camera that uploaded straight to the cloud. My body was falling apart, hot flashes that soaked my sheets, bone pain that kept me awake all night. The hormones helped a little, but the doctor warned recovery could take months if it came at all. I kept every text Nathan sent, messages about missing me, about starting fresh, about how we could make it work. I forwarded everything to Nora and to the police, even though my criminal complaint was still gathering dust. Then one morning, Nora called. Her voice was brisk. "We need to move fast with the state medical board complaint." I met her at her office. Dana and 3 other victims were already there, sworn statements in hand. We spent 4 straight hours dissecting every detail, making sure our allegations used the exact language that would trigger a mandatory investigation. Nora typed while we talked, her fingers flying. My hands trembled as I signed my statement, describing the bruises, the exhaustion, the stolen eggs. I didn't know it then, but that signature marked the moment everything started to shift. Rex walked in just as we were wrapping up at Nora's office. He pulled me aside, dropped a stack of papers in front of me, and started explaining FOIA requests, the Freedom of Information Act. "These forms are how you pry open what they don't want you to see," he said. He already had blanks for the clinic's inspection history, previous complaints, anything that could show a pattern of misconduct. Paperwork felt endless, but Rex kept talking about how these files had exposed cover-ups before, how victims never even knew the evidence existed until it was forced out. I kept filling out line after line, my pen scratching while he described the ways government agencies try to bury damaging info. That afternoon, Dana texted me a link she dug up about Nathan's mother. My stomach flipped. There she was, sitting on the boards of 2 major hospitals in our city. She wasn't just part of the system, she was the system. She sat on the very committees that reviewed ethics complaints. Suddenly it made sense why every previous victim hit a brick wall. The woman who destroyed our bodies was literally signing off on her own investigations. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept looping. 3 a.m. I found myself pulling on clothes, grabbing my keys, driving toward Nathan's apartment like a sleepwalker. Some desperate part of me wanted to dig up one last piece of evidence, something airtight, something that would make it impossible for them to wriggle out. I made it halfway before yanking my car into a gas station lot, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Going back would be reckless. Stupid. Could undo everything Nora had built. I sat there for an hour, heart pounding, before turning around and driving back to my temporary apartment. The next day, Rex called. His private investigator had dug up something huge. 3 former patients had filed complaints against the clinic, and all 3 had been bought off with NDAs. Payouts were staggering. One woman got $200,000. Another $350,000. The third $500,000. Money for silence. He had their names but couldn't reach out without breaking the agreements. That weekend, our coalition of victims met at Nora's office to calculate damages. We spread out medical bills, therapy receipts, pay stubs from jobs we'd lost or hours we couldn't work. My hormone treatments alone were running me $800 a month. Dana had spent $30,000 chasing fertility treatments before learning her ovaries were destroyed. Aurora had lost her job entirely after months of exhaustion and appointments. When Nora added everything up, the total made the room go silent. Millions. And that was just the financial cost. Nora explained we'd file as a group to show the pattern of abuse. She said the impact would be far greater if we stood together instead of individually. That night, I called Nathan while recording on my laptop. I pretended to be confused, asking questions about the eggs like I just wanted to understand. He couldn't help himself. He bragged. He talked about my premium genetics, my SAT scores, my college IQ test, how much that made me worth. He actually laughed, describing how couples had paid $100,000 each for eggs from someone with my background. His voice dripped with pride. My skin crawled, but I kept him talking for 20 minutes, getting it all on tape. The next morning, I met Rex at a coffee shop downtown. He looked exhausted, frustrated. He'd been digging for weeks but needed an insider, someone from inside the clinic, to go on record. Without that, he could only tell the story of individual victims, not the organized scheme behind it. As he spoke, I thought of Leah, the nurse who'd messaged me. She said she had more information but was scared to go public. 2 weeks later, an official letter arrived from the medical board acknowledging our complaint. They'd opened a preliminary investigation and wanted additional statements and documentation within 30 days. It was the first time someone in authority treated us like victims instead of hysterical women. Nora said this was huge. The board rarely moved this fast unless they already saw serious violations. We spent the next 3 days compiling every single document they asked for. Then another letter landed in my mailbox, this one from the clinic. The tone was syrupy sweet, inviting me to a complimentary consultation to discuss my concerns and ensure patient satisfaction. Nora took one glance at it and shook her head. "They're trying to get you a loan," she said. "They'll slide an NDA across the table with a check big enough to tempt you. Don't respond at all. Not even to decline." Clinic was nervous now. They were starting to make moves. And I knew we were finally getting close to the point of no return. 3 days later, I stepped out of my office building for lunch and froze. Nathan was standing just beyond the glass doors like a shadow waiting for me. My whole body went ice cold. As soon as he started walking toward me with his palms up, like some fake gesture of peace, I yanked out my phone and hit record. He kept saying we needed to talk and work things out. I backed up, dialing 911 while keeping the camera trained on him. My voice shook as I told the dispatcher about the restraining order I'd already filed. Nathan's eyes flicked when he heard me say, "Police." He started backing away, faster and faster. By the time the cops arrived 10 minutes later, he was gone. I gave them the video and filed yet another report. The next morning, I sat before a judge again with every piece of documentation spread out across the desk. She read the stalking report from the day before. She studied the pattern of him showing up uninvited. After 20 long minutes, she finally signed a temporary restraining order. Only 2 weeks, but still, it was something. That afternoon, Nora called about the vials I'd saved from Nathan's guitar case. She'd found an independent lab willing to test them under strict chain of custody rules. We met at the lab with the vials sealed in a bag I'd never opened. Technician photographed every item, had me sign form after form explaining each step. They'd test the drug composition and dust for fingerprints. Nora wanted evidence that would stand up in court, ironclad proof tying Nathan to the injections. A week later, the results landed like a hammer. Pharmaceutical-grade Lupron at concentrations used for chemical castration. Multiple clear fingerprints on the vials and syringes. Nora had already obtained Nathan's prints from his arrest records. Every single one matched. The lab tech said the fingerprints were fresh, not old, proof Nathan had handled the drugs recently. That same day, Leah called. Her voice trembled, but she said she was done staying quiet. She was ready to go on record. We met at Nora's office where a notary was waiting. Leah's hand shook as she described the clinic's special protocols. Sedating patients without proper consent, backdating forms to cover their tracks. She gave dates, named names, and explained the separate filing system for special cases like mine. Rex had been waiting for exactly this. Leah's sworn affidavit was the insider corroboration his story needed. 2 days later, Detective Weston Collier reached out, saying he'd been assigned to take over the case. He came to Nora's office, combed through our evidence, and took detailed notes. Then he dropped the bad news. The DA still wanted more direct proof tying Nathan's mother to the conspiracy. Her attorneys were already claiming she knew nothing, painting Nathan as a rogue employee acting alone. Without hard evidence of her direct involvement, she could still walk free. That weekend, our entire coalition gathered in Nora's conference room to sign the official paperwork. All 7 of us. We signed as plaintiffs in the civil suit against Nathan and his mother. Nora outlined our media strategy for maximum impact, filing publicly to pressure authorities to make it impossible to sweep under the rug. One by one, each woman shared what Nathan had done to her. Patterns were identical, down to the smallest details. The next morning, Rex called with news that turned my stomach. He'd been following the money trail from the egg sales and had found one couple who had unknowingly bought my eggs. They'd paid $110,000, believing they were receiving a willing donor's eggs. The clinic had told them I'd volunteered. Recs kept their names anonymous, but seeing the bank records made it horrifyingly real. My genetic material had been sold like merchandise. There were children out there with my DNA. The thought hit me so hard I had to sit down, gripping the edge of the table and breathing through a wave of nausea. That afternoon, we served the clinic with a preservation letter. Nora's paralegal walked it straight into their administrative office, hand-delivered so there could be no denying they'd received it. The letter was crystal clear. Every record, every email, every file, every second of video footage had to be preserved. Destroying anything now would cross the line into criminal obstruction. Nora explained this was how you build a paper trail that even the best lawyers couldn't wriggle out of. They could stall, they could threaten, but once that letter hit their desk, every missing document became evidence in itself. 3 days later, a thick envelope landed at my apartment. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Nathan's mother's attorney, dripping with venom. They accused me of being a bitter ex trying to extort money, called my statements defamatory, claimed I was damaging her pristine reputation, and demanded I retract everything within 48 hours. The language was cold, sharp, clearly designed to scare me into silence. But instead of fear, all it did was harden me. Nora had warned me this was coming, intimidation tactics straight out of the Predator's playbook. And the fact they were swinging this hard told me one thing: they were scared. We had them cornered. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Instagram notifications flooded in. Fake accounts had popped up overnight using my old photos, captions twisted to paint me as a vengeful ex trying to ruin an innocent man's life. They'd found my LinkedIn, my dusty old Facebook albums, even pictures from my sister's wedding. Comments were brutal. Strangers calling me every name imaginable, telling me I deserved what happened, that I was a liar. I spent hours reporting the accounts, but the second one got taken down, 2 more appeared. Then it got worse. My work email lit up with hundreds of messages. Some told me to drop the charges. Others were graphic threats, men describing exactly what they wanted to do to me. Some promised they'd show up at my office. I had to call IT, who helped me lock everything down, reset passwords, make every account private. In the end, I just deleted most of my social media altogether. But it didn't stop. Somehow my phone number got leaked. The calls started, heavy breathing, men's voices saying they knew where I lived. That same day, I drove straight to Verizon and changed my number. I gave the new one to only 5 people I trusted. Even so, the stress was destroying me from the inside out. My body was already fragile, but now? I'd wake up drenched, sheets soaked through with sweat. 5 minutes later, I'd be shivering so violently I'd crawl under 3 blankets and still couldn't get warm. My joints ached so bad some mornings I could barely stand, and the headaches felt like ice picks behind my eyes. I missed 2 more days of work. My boss pulled me aside and warned me that HR was getting involved if I didn't fix my attendance immediately. I wanted to scream, how do I fix attendance when my body has been chemically shut down? But all I could do was nod. The endocrinologist ordered another round of tests. She sat me down and explained it plain. My body was in menopause. At 25. She said hormone replacement therapy would help stabilize things, but it would take months before I felt any relief. I'd need estrogen patches, progesterone pills, and I'd be on them for the rest of my life. She warned me about mood swings, weight gain, hot flashes. And then came the gut punch. Natural pregnancy was now extremely unlikely. I walked out of her office with the prescriptions in my hand, sat in my car, and sobbed for an hour. Not because I wanted kids right now, but because the choice had been stolen from me forever. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in the dark scrolling through medical sites, reading everything I could about Lupron, how it works, what doses are used, where the injections go for maximum absorption. I told myself I was just trying to understand what he'd done to me. But my bookmarks told a different story. Diagrams of injection sites across the abdomen and thighs, lists of dosages, instructions on 3-month depot shots versus daily injections. The deeper I went, the darker it got. I read about how men take it for prostate cancer. I found forums where trans men discussed using it to suppress estrogen production. And it hit me, sick and heavy. Nathan had essentially done the reverse to me and the other women, turning our bodies into something we never consented to. By 4 a.m., I was still awake, watching YouTube videos of nurses demonstrating subcutaneous injections, mimicking the motion with a pen against my thigh, memorizing the angle and depth. The knowledge felt like holding a weapon. And I couldn't stop thinking about that key still in my purse, the one to his apartment, and how easy it would be to do to him what he'd done to us. 3 nights later, movement outside my window jolted me awake. I peeked through the blinds and there he was, Nathan, standing in the parking lot, staring straight up at my apartment like a horror movie. My hand shook as I grabbed my phone, zooming in to get his face under the streetlight. He didn't move for 20 minutes, just watched. When he started walking toward the entrance, I hit 911. The dispatcher stayed on the line while I whispered what was happening. In the background, I could hear the sirens drawing closer. Nathan must have heard them too because he suddenly turned, sprinted to his car, and sped off. 5 minutes later, the cops arrived, took my statement, looked at the video, and said they'd add it to his restraining order violations. The next morning, Nora called me into her office. One look at her face and I knew she'd seen something in me. She spoke carefully, like someone trying to talk a friend off a ledge. She said she understood my anger, that she'd seen that look in my eyes when I talked about the injections. But she warned me, her voice low and firm. Any hint of revenge would destroy our case, erase everything we'd built. She made me promise, eye to eye, that I'd let the legal system handle it, that she'd personally make sure he paid, but only if I stayed clean. I promised. Out loud, I promised. But we both knew I was lying. She held out her hand for the key to Nathan's apartment. Slowly, I gave it up. That afternoon, Detective Collier called with a plan. The DA needed more evidence linking Nathan's mother to the conspiracy. He wanted me to get Nathan talking on a recorded line about the technical details. I spent an hour preparing, writing down questions, practicing how to sound casual, steadying my voice so I wouldn't gag when I heard his. When Nathan answered, he sounded cheerful, like we were old friends catching up. I had to clench my jaw to keep from throwing up. I played dumb, asked how he'd managed the injections without waking me. He laughed. He actually laughed and started explaining the lidocaine cream ratios, how his mom had taught him to wait 15 minutes for full numbness before inserting the needle. He described rotating injection sites between hips and abdomen to avoid scar tissue, how the 3-month Lupron depot was more efficient than daily shots. Then he drifted into bragging about his mom's protocols, the sedative schedule that kept patients compliant but mobile, how she'd perfected the timing so women would sign consent forms they'd never remember. When I asked how she got away with it for so long, he said it like a punchline. She knew which medical board members to donate to, which hospital administrators owed her favors. He called it smart business. The recording lasted 40 minutes. 40 minutes of him confessing, bragging, showing zero guilt or even a flicker of awareness that he'd destroyed multiple lives. And every second was now saved, preserved, waiting to be used against him. That evening, my phone lit up with an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me to pick up. The voice on the other end was smooth and sweet, honey over broken glass. Nathan's mother. She said she wanted to make things right, offered to pay for all my medical treatment, promised the best specialists, even hinted she could reverse some of the damage if I came back to her clinic. I stayed silent. And just like that, her tone flipped. The sweetness evaporated, replaced by ice. She told me I had no idea who I was dealing with. Said she had connections everywhere, that she could make sure I never worked in the city again. She said people would believe a respected doctor over some hysterical girl. She boasted about her ways of making problems disappear. Told me to think very carefully about my next move. I didn't say a word. I just recorded everything, her threats spilling out faster, sharper, more explicit as she realized I wasn't backing down. As soon as the call ended, I emailed the file to Nora and uploaded a backup to my personal cloud. 2 days later, Nora called with a kind of disbelief in her voice. The medical board had scheduled an emergency license suspension hearing for the following week. They'd issued subpoenas for everything: patient files, financial documents, records going back 15 years. Rex's preliminary article about fertility clinic fraud had gone viral, forcing the board to move at lightning speed. Members who'd once shielded Nathan's mother were now scrambling to distance themselves. Leah called that afternoon, her voice shaking but fierce. She'd done something risky, copied dozens of consent forms from the clinic's computer before anyone noticed. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and she spread the papers across the table with trembling hands. The metadata screamed tampering, dates that didn't line up, signatures too perfect to be real. She'd risked her career for this. I can't keep watching what they do to people, she whispered. I took photos of everything while she kept glancing at the door. As I packed up my camera roll, my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. He was leaving town and wanted to apologize properly before he went. My skin crawled. I forwarded it straight to Detective Collier. He called back within minutes, confirming they had eyes on Nathan's apartment and were tracking his credit cards. The next morning, Leah sat with Nora in her law office, signing whistleblower paperwork. Nora walked her through each page, explaining the protections she'd have against retaliation. Leah's hand shook as she signed, knowing this meant she'd probably never work in healthcare in this city again. 3 days later, we sat side by side in the medical board's hearing room. Nathan's mother's lawyer tore into us like a buzzsaw. She called me a scorned ex, said Dana was mentally unstable. Claimed Aurora had financial motives. My knuckles went white on the edge of my chair, but when it was my turn to speak, my voice stayed steady. I read from my medical records. Dana presented hormone tests from 5 different labs. Aurora showed photos of her injection sites mapped in the exact same pattern as ours. The lawyer kept interrupting, objecting, trying to make us look like liars or lunatics. But when the time came to vote, the board didn't even deliberate. One by one, their hands went up. Unanimous. Her license suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. She sat there, jaw clenched, eyes locked on me with pure hatred while her lawyer whispered furiously in her ear. And for the first time in months, I felt a crack of light through the darkness. The next morning, I stood across the street from the clinic, heart pounding as police swarmed the building. They marched out with armfuls of boxes, files, computers, medication crates, like a scene from a movie. Detective Collier called later to update me. They'd found partial records and medication supplies. But someone had wiped key computer files the night before. Not a surprise given how much warning they'd had, but still a gut punch knowing vital evidence was gone. 2 days later, the DA's office finally moved. Criminal charges were filed. Nathan was arrested at his apartment for assault, poisoning, and violating the restraining order. 4 hours later, he was back on the street. His mother posted $100,000 bail without blinking. She was named as an unindicted co-conspirator, meaning the case against her was still being built. That same week, our civil suit went public. All 7 of us were listed as plaintiffs. Nora had worked around the clock on the paperwork, calculating damages for medical costs, lost wages, pain, and suffering. The court scheduled our initial conference for the following month. Within hours, Rex's story exploded across social media. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with interview requests from news outlets and podcasts. But I ignored them all. I was too exhausted to be anyone's poster child for medical abuse. 3 weeks later, after a doctor's appointment, I walked into the parking garage and froze. Nathan was standing by the elevator. My whole body went cold, but I forced myself to stay calm. He started walking toward me, close enough for me to smell that cologne, the same one that used to make me feel safe. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 on speaker, loudly describing his location and that he was violating a restraining order. He kept coming, saying he just wanted to talk, that I was overreacting, that we could work this out. I backed toward my car, holding the phone high so the operator could hear everything. Then he reached for my arm. And in that split second, everything I'd prepared for clicked into place. I'd been carrying a sterile swab in my pocket for weeks, waiting for this exact moment. As his hand closed around my wrist, something slipped from his jacket pocket. A small syringe case clattered onto the concrete. I bent fast, using the swab to pick it up without touching it directly. His fingerprints, maybe his DNA, were all over it. He tried to snatch it back, but I was already moving toward the area under security cameras, narrating everything to the dispatcher. Nathan finally seemed to understand how bad this looked. He started backing away. Security guards spilled out of the building entrance, having heard the commotion. Nathan turned and ran as I stood there, hands trembling but mind crystal clear. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was evidence, the kind that could stop him from ever doing this to someone else. Police arrived within 10 minutes. I handed over the syringe case wrapped in the sterile swab. The officer bagged it carefully while I showed him the security footage on my phone of Nathan approaching me. They arrested him right there in the parking garage. From behind my car, I watched his face morph from anger to shock as the handcuffs clicked shut. Detective Collier called later that afternoon. "This," he said, "is perfect for the case. Most victims panic," he explained. "They don't think to preserve DNA evidence." But the syringe tested positive for luprin, and Nathan's prints were all over it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the tide was finally turning. 2 weeks later, I finally moved into a new apartment across town, a place with a doorman, security cameras in every hallway, and key cards required just to use the elevator. Concierge logged every single visitor by name. It wasn't home yet, but it felt like a fortress. I switched gyms, found a new grocery store, even changed my morning coffee shop. I never drove the same route twice, never parked in the same spot. The constant vigilance wore me down, but I couldn't relax. Not while Nathan was still out on bail. That week, I sat in my endocrinologist's office staring at charts I could barely process. She explained, gently but firmly, that the damage was permanent. My ovaries would never produce eggs again. Natural pregnancy was no longer possible. She talked about donor eggs, about adoption, about options. But all I could think about were the 67 eggs Nathan had already stolen from me. The hot flashes would last for years. The hormone replacement therapy? For life. She was upfront about the increased risks too: osteoporosis, heart disease, complications of early menopause. I appreciated that she didn't sugarcoat any of it. But I still broke down crying right there in her office, tears dripping onto the paper gown I was wearing. 3 days later, the DA's office called with news that, for once, didn't crush me. They were upgrading Nathan's charges to include administering controlled substances without consent, charges that carried real prison time. And his mother? She was finally being formally charged as a co-conspirator. Prosecutor said the recordings of Nathan bragging about his mom teaching him were key to making it stick. That Friday, Rex's article dropped. My phone lit up instantly. He'd interviewed all 7 of us, weaving our testimonies with medical documentation that showed the undeniable pattern of abuse. The headline alone made my stomach twist. But reading it, seeing our stories laid out with evidence, hit like a lightning strike. Powerful. Unignorable. Within hours, the piece had gone viral. Thousands of shares. Clinics' phone lines were reportedly jammed with calls. The newspaper's tip line, set up specifically for the story, got over 40 calls in the first day, women describing eerily similar experiences. Some from Nathan's mother's clinic, others from fertility centers all across the state. The medical board announced they were expanding their investigation to multiple facilities. This wasn't just about one corrupt family anymore. This was systemic. The following week, Dana organized our first official support group meeting at a community center. We printed intake forms, created protocols for documenting experiences safely. Aurora brought a therapist friend who specialized in medical trauma to help structure the meetings. We even set up a buddy system so no one had to attend appointments or hearings alone. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was helping others. Watching that small circle of survivors grow from 7 to 25 in a single month gave me something bigger to hold on to than just my rage. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was all of ours. Nora called an emergency meeting the moment the clinic's insurance company reached out. They were dangling a settlement in front of us, $2 million to be divided among all plaintiffs. No admission of wrongdoing, no apology. Just money. The number sat heavy in the room. $2 million. Enough to cover medical bills, hormone treatments, therapy. Enough to buy back some stability. But the price? Signing away the right to keep fighting in court. No trial. No chance to force them to admit what they'd done. We argued for hours. Some women needed the money immediately just to afford their next round of medication. Others burned with fury, demanding the clinic be dragged through a public trial. 3 hours of back and forth, voices breaking, hands trembling. In the end, we voted. We accepted. The insurance company gave us 48 hours. We all gathered in Nora's office again, pens scratching across paper that would change the course of our case. After legal fees, each of us would get around $280,000. It wouldn't fix our bodies. It wouldn't restore what Nathan and his mother had stolen. But it meant treatment. It meant security. It meant we could breathe. That weekend, I sat alone at my desk writing my victim impact statement for Nathan's criminal trial. Draft after draft, 12 in total, crumpled, rewritten, started again. How do you capture in words what someone has stolen from you? It wasn't just eggs. It wasn't just fertility. It was trust. Safety. The ability to walk into a doctor's office without wondering if you're about to be betrayed. I wrote about the physical torment of menopause at 25. About the bone-deep exhaustion, the hot flashes that drenched me in sweat, the migraines that split my skull. But I also wrote about the crueler theft, the babies that exist out there with my DNA, children I'll never know, born from eggs I never consented to give. I wrote about the women in our support group, women who will never have biological children because of what Nathan and his mother did. I made sure their voices lived inside mine, stitched into every line. When I finished, I printed one copy and tucked it into the top drawer of my desk. Not as evidence. Not for the trial. But as a reminder. A reminder that I survived. My life isn't the one I planned. But I'm building something new, alongside women who know exactly what it feels like to be gutted and left hollow, and who refuse to let that be the end of their story. And that's where I'll leave you. Congrats for sticking with me through the end. I wasn't sure you would. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you want more stories that'll make you question everything. 'Cause sometimes the darkest truths hide right where you think you're safest.
Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.